My name is Sylvette, I'm 50 years old, and my own granddaughter once called me irrelevant. That word hung in the air heavier than any insult I had ever faced. I'm not a frail old woman. I still run errands, manage my business accounts, and drive myself wherever I need to go. I take long walks in the park, volunteer at the library, and host family dinners with energy to spare. Yet, to my granddaughter Alina, I wasn't just old, I was invisible, irrelevant. I had never thought of myself that way. At 50, I still had decades of life left in me. Still carried wisdom and experiences my children and grandchildren hadn't yet begun to understand. I had built a business from scratch with my late husband Leon. Together, we turned a struggling corner shop into a chain of boutiques that supported not just us, but the entire family. I managed properties, paid bills on time, and kept my house in order. My hands weren't idle, my mind wasn't foggy, I was far from irrelevant. But when the insult came from her lips, it pierced straight through me. Alina is 26, bright, beautiful, and ambitious. I had loved her since the day she was born, had rocked her to sleep, bought her school clothes, and covered her tuition when my daughter couldn't. I had watched her grow from a shy little girl who loved to sit on my lap and listen to stories into a young woman who now spoke with a sharp tongue and too much arrogance for her own good. That evening, the family had gathered at my home for dinner. I had spent hours preparing roast chicken, scalloped potatoes, green beans with almonds, the recipes my mother taught me. When the plates were served, conversation turned lively, filled with the usual chatter. I offered Alina some advice when she mentioned a new job opportunity, gently reminding her to read the contract carefully before signing. It wasn't criticism, only care. But she rolled her eyes. "Grandma, no offense, but you're kind of irrelevant now. Things aren't done the way you used to do them. I can handle it myself." The room went quiet. Some of the family chuckled awkwardly, others stared at their plates. No one defended me. No one told her she had gone too far. And I sat frozen, her words echoing in my ears. Irrelevant. The girl I had once carried in my arms, the girl whose scraped knees I had kissed, the girl whose dreams I had encouraged, she looked at me like a relic of the past, a burden rather than a foundation. I swallowed hard and forced a smile, refusing to let her see how deeply it cut. "All right, Alina," I said softly. "I'll let you handle it." But inside, something cracked. That word replayed in my head long after the dishes were cleared, long after the family went home. I stood alone in my kitchen, staring at the counters where Leon and I had once cooked together, where I had taught my children how to measure flour, where Alina herself had licked the spoon from the mixing bowl. How could she not see? How could she not know that everything she had, the opportunities, the privileges, the comfort, had been built on the sacrifices of the woman she had just dismissed? I thought of Leon then. Gone 5 years now. He had always said, "Sylvie, people forget where they came from when they think they've arrived. Don't let that discourage you. You know your worth." But even his words couldn't wash away the sting. At 50, I should have felt in my prime, seasoned but not spent, wise but not obsolete. Yet my own granddaughter had reduced me to a shadow in my own home. That night, as I sat in the quiet, I realized something. This wasn't just about Alina's insult. It was about a deeper wound. One that had been festering for years. The way younger voices sometimes dismissed older ones. The way society rushed to replace experience with novelty, wisdom with speed. And now, that attitude had made its way into my own family. But here's the thing, I am not irrelevant. I had built too much, given too much, endured too much to let anyone erase me with a careless word. Alina had no idea what I held in my hands. She didn't know about the documents stored in my safe, the legal power I carried, the plans Leon and I had made long before she was even born. She didn't know that her arrogance had consequences. I had stayed silent at that dinner table, but in my heart, a fire had been lit. If she wanted to call me irrelevant, I would show her just how wrong she was. That single word burned more than any insult I'd ever heard. It wasn't the first time she made me feel small. Alina's words that evening were cruel, but the truth is, I should have seen them coming. The signs had been there for years, little moments that, at the time, I brushed aside as immaturity, as youthful arrogance. But taken together, they painted a picture of a young woman who had long ago stopped respecting me. When she was 16, I remember trying to teach her how to cook. She had asked me to show her my recipe for my mother's apple pie, the one I'd been making since I was her age. I pulled out the flour, sugar, cinnamon, and apples, explaining step by step the process of making a crust from scratch. She barely looked up from her phone. "Grandma, nobody does it like this anymore," she said, smirking. "Why waste an hour when I can buy a frozen one in 10 minutes?" I laughed it off at the time, telling myself she was just a teenager who didn't understand, but it stung. The pie wasn't just food, it was tradition. A piece of family history passed from one generation to the next. Her dismissal felt like she was throwing away more than just a recipe. At 18, when she graduated high school, I offered her a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. I held it out proudly, explaining how the pearls had been strung together by hand. How my father had gifted them to my mother on their wedding day. She rolled her eyes. "Grandma, pearls are old-fashioned. I'd never wear this." She shoved the box back into my hands and laughed. "Sell it or keep it for your antique collection." I smiled through the rejection, but later, alone, I cried. That necklace wasn't just jewelry, it was a symbol of love, a family heirloom, and she tossed it aside like costume beads. At 21, she needed money for college. Her parents had done what they could, but the expenses were more than they could manage. I stepped in, pulling from my savings to cover her tuition, books, and rent for 2 years. Did she thank me? Briefly. But within weeks she was boasting to her friends about how she had figured things out herself. I overheard her once telling someone, "My grandma just gives me money because she feels guilty about being old-fashioned." That one stung the deepest. Still, I forgave her. I told myself she was young, that she would grow, that one day she would understand the sacrifices I had made. I kept loving her, supporting her, hoping she would outgrow the arrogance. But she didn't. By 25, she had a good job, an apartment of her own, and more confidence than wisdom. She strutted into family gatherings with designer purses and expensive shoes, talking about how she would one day inherit everything Leon and I had built. "I mean, it's obvious," she once said loudly over dinner. "Grandma's not going to be around forever, and when she's gone, I'll be set. My friends are jealous, I don't have to worry about money." The table went quiet. My children looked uncomfortable, but no one corrected her. I sat there, forcing myself to chew my food, while inside, my stomach twisted. She wasn't grateful. She wasn't respectful. She was entitled. And now, at 26, she had looked me in the eye and called me irrelevant. That was the breaking point. It wasn't just the insult itself. It was the years of little cuts, little dismissals, little reminders that she didn't see me as a person with value anymore. She saw me as a stepping stone, a relic, a wallet, an inevitable inheritance. I thought of Leon again, of how he used to shake his head when people underestimated me. "They don't see it yet, Sylvie," he would say. "But you're the backbone of this family." He was right. And if Alina couldn't see it, then maybe it was time to remind her. Because while she saw me as irrelevant, she didn't know the truth. She didn't know that I had the power to shape her future in ways she couldn't even imagine. She didn't know that one day, she would come to regret every careless word, every dismissive laugh, every entitled assumption. I sat that night in the quiet of my study, looking at the locked drawer where I kept my will and estate documents. For years, they had been untouched, written in a way that included every grandchild equally, because Leon and I had wanted fairness. But fairness was not the same as entitlement, and respect was not optional. But this time, she crossed a line she couldn't come back from. It happened at a family dinner. I had hosted countless family dinners in my life. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday gatherings, it had always been my joy to bring people together around the table. I never saw it as a burden. The preparation, the cooking, the cleaning, it was my way of keeping the family connected. Leon used to tease me, saying I could run a restaurant with the way I managed to cook for a dozen people without breaking a sweat. But this dinner was different. It was supposed to be simple, just a midweek gathering. I had roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and a fresh salad. The smells filled the kitchen, warm and comforting, a reminder of the love poured into every meal. Everyone arrived one by one. My daughter Isabel came with her husband, Richard. My son, Paul, brought his twins, who ran through the house with noisy laughter. And then Alina arrived, as she always did, late, with her phone glued to her hand and a look of superiority on her face. She kissed me on the cheek quickly, barely looking at me, before dropping her designer purse on the couch. "Smells nice, Grandma," she said absently, already scrolling through messages. I forced a smile. "I'm glad you could make it." Dinner began the way it usually did, plates passed around, chatter filling the air. I asked the children about school, listened to Isabel talk about work, and laughed at Paul's stories. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then Alina began talking about her job. She had just received a promotion, and her voice rang with pride. It's about time they recognized my talent. Honestly, I should have been given more responsibility sooner. They kept acting like I wasn't ready, but clearly I was. Now I have an assistant. Can you believe that? At 26, I have someone working under me. The table murmured polite congratulations. I nodded and said, "That's wonderful, Alina. Just make sure you read everything you sign. Carefully, contracts can sometimes hide things that aren't in your favor." It was meant as encouragement, not criticism. A reminder to protect herself, the same advice I would give anyone. But she rolled her eyes, smirking. "Grandma, please. Things aren't like when you were young. You don't understand how it works now. No offense, but you're kind of irrelevant when it comes to this stuff." The words hit me like a slap. The laughter and chatter around the table stopped. Isabel shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Paul looked down at his plate. Even Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. No one defended me. No one told her she was out of line. Alina leaned back in her chair, smiling, as though she had said something clever. I forced myself to take a sip of water, my hand steady even though my chest felt heavy. "I only meant to remind you to be cautious," I said softly. "Sure, Grandma," she replied with a dismissive wave. "But I've got it handled, don't worry." The conversation moved on, but my mind didn't. The word irrelevant echoed over and over, louder than the clinking of forks against plates, louder than the chatter that resumed half-heartedly. Irrelevant. I looked around the table at the family I had raised, supported, and held together. I thought of the long nights Leon and I had spent working so our children could have opportunities, of the sacrifices we had made so they wouldn't have to struggle. And here I was, 50 years old, treated like a faded photograph in the background. Alina laughed again later in the meal, bragging about the vacations she planned to take, the car she wanted to buy. "I mean, I'll be fine," she said casually. "One day I'll inherit enough to never have to worry." She didn't say it directly to me, but her eyes flicked in my direction. The entitlement in her voice was unmistakable. I smiled politely, but inside, something hardened. She thought I was irrelevant. She thought my role was finished, that I was just a placeholder until she stepped into the life I had built. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know that I still held the pen that decided who got what. She didn't know that while she sat there smirking, I was already thinking of the documents in my safe, the power I still had. Dinner ended with hugs and goodbyes, though hers was quick and careless. "See you, Grandma," she said, already heading for the door, phone in hand. When the last car pulled away, I stood in the doorway alone, the night air cool against my skin. The house was quiet again, but the words still rang in my ears. Irrelevant. What she didn't realize was that the foundation she stood on, her education, her lifestyle, her future, was built on me. And I wasn't done shaping it. Dinner. When the last echoes of laughter had faded and the house was empty again, I sat in the living room staring at the photographs on the mantel. Family portraits spanning decades smiled back at me. There was Leon, his arm wrapped tightly around me when we were young. There were my children, Isabel and Paul, grinning in school uniforms I had worked double shifts to afford. And there was Alina as a little girl, her curls tied up in ribbons, smiling with innocence before arrogance found her. The house itself seemed to breathe with memories. The floorboards held the sound of children's footsteps. The kitchen walls carried the scent of years of Sunday roasts. And the garden outside was filled with flowers Leon and I had planted by hand. Every inch of this home was built with sacrifice, patience, and love. Leon and I hadn't come from wealth. We had scraped by in the early years, living paycheck to paycheck, saving pennies in a jar. He had worked long days at the factory while I took in sewing at home to stretch our income. We dreamed of something bigger, not for ourselves, but for the family we would raise. That dream took shape in the form of a little boutique shop. We sold clothing, handmade at first, and then curated items that people in town loved. Leon would do deliveries in the evenings while I worked behind the counter during the day. Slowly, it grew. One shop became two became four. Eventually, we built a small chain across the state. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, reliable. Enough to give our children stability. I remembered the nights we stayed up balancing the books, the arguments over whether we could afford to expand, the sheer exhaustion that came with working 7 days a week. And yet, I also remembered the pride in Leon's eyes when he saw Isabel graduate, when Paul bought his first car, when Alina, sweet little Alina, held her diploma and declared she wanted to make something of herself. Everything she had was built on what we gave. Every opportunity, every advantage, every safety net. And now, she called me irrelevant. I clenched my hands in my lap, feeling the weight of the betrayal. She didn't understand that the very ground she walked on had been laid stone by my husband and me. She didn't know the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the times we went without so our children wouldn't. She saw the wealth, the comfort, the inheritance waiting like a fruit on a tree, but she ignored the roots that nourished it. The more I thought about it, the more something inside me shifted. Why should she inherit it? Why should she, of all people, receive what Leon and I bled for, when she had no respect for where it came from? The thought startled me at first. I had always assumed everything would be divided equally. Fairness had been my guiding principle. But fairness without respect is nothing but entitlement dressed up as justice. I rose from my chair and walked to the study. The safe sat quietly in the corner, its metal door reflecting the faint glow of the lamp. I knelt, turned the dial with practiced hands, and opened it. Inside were the documents Leon and I had prepared years ago. The will, the estate plans, the business agreements. My fingers brushed over the crisp paper, and I felt Leon's presence with me. He had always trusted me to protect the family's legacy. He used to say, "Sylvie, it's not about leaving money behind. It's about leaving behind the right values." That night, I realized he had been right all along. I sat at the desk, the papers spread before me, and whispered into the quiet. If respect is gone, then so is her place in this. The thought no longer startled me. It steadied me. I thought of Alina's smirk, her dismissive tone, her careless assumption that she was owed my life's work. And I realized something with a clarity that cut through the sting of her insult. I didn't have to let her inherit any of it. She wanted to call me irrelevant. But I was far from powerless. I still held the pen, and with one stroke of that pen, I could change her future forever. And I realized I didn't have to let her inherit any of it. At first, I tried to forgive her. That night, after pulling out the estate papers, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the creaks of the old house, remembering the sound of Leon's steady breathing that once comforted me in the dark. Without him, decisions weighed heavier. He had always been the practical one, reminding me to temper my emotions before acting, and so I heard his voice in my head, urging me to give Alina grace. She was young, I told myself. Maybe she didn't realize how sharp her words had been. Perhaps irrelevant had slipped from her lips without thought. Haven't we all said things we wish we could take back? So I decided to let it go, at least for the moment. I carried on with my routines, pretending nothing had happened. I tended the garden, answered emails for the boutique chain, met with tenants about one of the rental properties. But beneath the surface, the memory of her smirk gnawed at me. Then came the phone call. "Grandma," Alina said brightly, "I'm planning a trip with my friends to the Caribbean. Can you spot me a little extra money? I'll pay you back once my bonus hits." Her tone was casual, as if I were her personal bank. I paused, gripping the receiver tighter. "Alina, I already helped you with tuition and your first apartment. Don't you think it's time you handled these things on your own?" She laughed. "Oh, come on. You can afford it. What else are you going to spend it on? You don't even travel anymore." The words hit me like a slap. What she meant was clear. In her mind, my life was winding down, and my money was simply waiting for her. I told her no. My voice was firm, though my hands trembled when I hung up. Days later, I saw the posts online. Pictures of Alina sipping cocktails on a beach, captions about living her best life. I knew instantly she had gotten the money elsewhere, but the sting wasn't about the money itself. It was the caption beneath one photo. "When you work hard, you get to enjoy life, while others just sit around." I knew who she meant. Still, I tried again to forgive her. I told myself she was just showing off, caught up in appearances. I wanted to believe she would mature. But the pattern continued. At Easter, when I reminded her about a family tradition, she muttered loud enough for the others to hear, "That's so outdated. We don't have to live like it's the 1,950 seconds just because Grandma wants to." At a birthday gathering, when I offered advice about managing credit cards, she smirked. "Don't worry, Grandma. We're not like you, we actually know how to use apps." And at a casual lunch with her and Isabel, she laughed as she scrolled through her phone. One of my friends said their grandma still tries to be involved in everything. I told them I get it, mine's the same way. Doesn't know when to step back. Each comment chipped away at me, reminding me again and again that in her eyes, I was irrelevant. A relic. I wanted to scream, to tell her the truth that her entire life was built on the foundation I had laid. That while she mocked my ways, she was living comfortably because of them. That I wasn't irrelevant, I was the reason she had the luxury to look down on me. But I stayed silent, until the day she came to my house unannounced. She flopped down on the sofa, tossing her purse aside, and said, "So, I was talking to my friends and we're all planning where we'll live in a few years. I told them I'd probably inherit this place. It's too big for you anyway, Grandma. You'll probably move somewhere smaller." Her words were careless, thoughtless, but they were also a knife in my heart. She wasn't asking. She was assuming, declaring, deciding my future without me, as if I were already gone. I looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't the little girl who used to beg me to braid her hair. She wasn't the teenager who once curled up in my bed when she had nightmares. She was a grown woman with entitlement in her eyes, speaking as though I were already a ghost. And something in me snapped. The forgiveness I had been clinging to crumbled. Leon's voice, so often gentle in my memory, seemed sharper now. "Don't let anyone disrespect what you've built, Sylvie. Protect it." I smiled at her then, though my heart was pounding. "Is that what you think, Alina?" I asked calmly. "Of course," she said, oblivious. "It's only logical. You won't need all this forever." I nodded slowly, hiding the storm inside me. That was the moment I made my decision. Enough was enough. Her words weren't slips of immaturity. They were patterns, beliefs rooted deep in her. And if she thought my home, my estate, and my legacy were hers for the taking, she was about to learn otherwise. The very next morning, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. And that's when I made an appointment with my lawyer. My lawyer, Mr. Duval, listened carefully as I explained. The day of my appointment, I dressed deliberately. Not in flashy clothes, those had never been my style, but in something sharp and dignified. A pressed navy blazer, a cream blouse, polished shoes. I wanted to walk into that office looking every bit as relevant as I felt, no matter what Alina thought. Mr. Duval's office was a place I knew well. Leon and I had sat in that same wood-paneled room years earlier, discussing wills and trusts and future plans. Leon had insisted then that we plan for every possibility. It's not about us, he had said. It's about protecting them, even when we're not here. But now, I wasn't here to protect Alina. I was here to protect myself and my legacy. From her, Mr. Duval greeted me warmly, shaking my hand, before motioning for me to sit across from his massive oak desk. His gray hair was combed neatly, his glasses perched low on his nose. He carried the calm authority of someone who had seen everything and wasn't easily rattled. "What can I do for you today, Sylvette?" he asked kindly. I took a deep breath. "I need to make changes to my will." His brows lifted slightly, though his expression remained professional. "What sort of changes?" I hesitated, the weight of my words pressing down. "I want to remove my granddaughter Alina as a beneficiary." Silence stretched between us for a beat. He leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me. "That's not a small decision. May I ask why?" I swallowed, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Because she doesn't respect me. She sees me as irrelevant. She talks as if I'm already gone. She mocks my traditions, disregards my sacrifices, and assumes everything I've built is hers for the taking. I've given her more than she knows: her tuition, her first apartment, countless opportunities, and she still treats me like I'm in her way. If that's how she feels, then she shouldn't benefit from the life Leon and I worked so hard to build." Mr. Duval nodded slowly, tapping a pen against his desk. "It's your right. You are under no obligation to leave her anything. But I want you to understand the consequences. She may contest it. She may cause trouble when the time comes. I'm prepared for that," I said firmly. "But I won't reward disrespect, not anymore." He studied me for another long moment, then smiled faintly. "I have to say, Sylvette, you don't sound irrelevant to me." The knot in my chest loosened slightly, and I allowed myself a small smile. "Thank you." We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail. He pulled out the original will, spreading the pages across the desk. My name was there, alongside Leon's, in signatures inked years earlier. Back then, every grandchild had been included equally, because we had wanted fairness. But Leon had always said the will could change if circumstances did. "This document," Mr. Duval explained, pointing to the section that listed beneficiaries, "is yours to amend. We can strike her name, redistribute her portion, or establish conditions that would exclude her." "I don't want conditions," I said. "I don't want loopholes. I want it clear. She is excluded." His pen scratched across the page as he made notes. "Understood." He asked if I wanted to redistribute Alina's share to Isabel's children, to Paul's twins, or to charity. After a moment's thought, I said, "Divide it among the others. They've shown me respect. They've earned it." He nodded, making the adjustments. Then he slid a fresh draft in front of me. "Read it carefully. Make sure it reflects exactly what you want." I read every line slowly, my heart pounding with each word. When I reached the section where Alina's name had once been, I felt a surge of both grief and relief. Grief, because this was my granddaughter. Relief, because I was finally taking control. "Mr. Duval handed me a pen. "If this is what you want, sign here." I picked up the pen, my hand steady. For a moment I thought of Alina as a little girl, her laughter ringing through this house. I thought of the nights she had fallen asleep in my arms. I thought of all the chances I had given her to show me kindness. And then I remembered her smirk, her words irrelevant. I signed. The scratch of ink across paper was final, like a door closing. Mr. Duval gathered the pages neatly and slid them into a folder. "It's done. From this moment, she is no longer a beneficiary of your estate. You don't owe her an explanation. But if you ever decide to tell her, I'd advise doing it with witnesses present." "Witnesses? It's done?" I asked. He leaned forward. "Yes. If you tell her directly, she may try to twist your words later, claim you were coerced, or say you didn't know what you were doing. If you decide to make it known, Do it formally. Have me there, have family present. That way, there is no room for doubt. The thought sent a shiver through me. I had imagined one day telling her quietly, in private, that she had been excluded. But no, he was right. Alina would never accept it gracefully. She would turn it into a spectacle. Better to meet arrogance with undeniable truth. I nodded. Thank you, Mr. Duval. You've given me more peace today than I've felt in years. He smiled gently. Peace is priceless. And remember, Sylvette, you are far from irrelevant. You are the one holding the pen. I left his office that day with my shoulders straighter, my heart lighter. For the first time since Alina's insult, I felt in control. I had not only reclaimed my dignity, I had ensured she would learn the cost of her arrogance. And when I signed those papers, I felt stronger than I had in years. I didn't tell anyone at first. The documents, Mr. Duval prepared were locked safely in my study, tucked inside the heavy steel safe that had guarded my most precious records for years. Each time I passed that safe, I felt a quiet thrill of satisfaction. My decision had been made, sealed, and witnessed by the only man whose opinion could make it legally binding. But for now, I kept my silence. I went about my days as though nothing had changed. I hosted Sunday dinners, baked pies for the twins, and took my morning walks. On the surface, everything looked the same. But inside me, there was a steel spine that hadn't been there before. Every dismissive laugh, every eye roll from Alina, no longer dug under my skin. They only reminded me of what she didn't know. And she didn't know anything. At our next family gathering, Alina strutted in late, as always. She tossed her jacket onto a chair and plopped down at the table, scrolling through her phone before even saying hello. Isabel asked her about work, and she launched into a long story about how indispensable she had become. They literally can't function without me, she bragged. My boss told me I'm the future of the company. I told him I know. The others chuckled politely. I simply smiled, sipping my tea. She didn't notice the difference in me, how calm I was, how her arrogance no longer flustered me. Instead, she carried on, bragging about her upcoming trips, the new car she planned to buy, and, as always, her future inheritance. At one point, she laughed and said, "Honestly, Grandma's sitting on a gold mine. One day, I won't have to worry about rent or loans or anything. I'll be set." The table fell into an uneasy silence. Paul shot me an apologetic glance. Isabel cleared her throat, and Richard changed the subject. Alina, oblivious, kept scrolling. I said nothing. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. Her arrogance was a house of cards, and I had already pulled the foundation out from under it. She just didn't know yet. Days turned into weeks, and Alina's behavior remained the same. She called me when she needed money, and when I refused, she laughed it off. She posted pictures online of her expensive dinners, captioned with lines like, "Can't wait until I never have to budget again." Each word only fueled my resolve. I began to imagine the moment she would learn the truth. I pictured the look on her face when she realized the inheritance she boasted about was gone, stripped away by the very woman she had called irrelevant. I pictured her sputtering, her arrogance crumbling, her certainty dissolving. But Mr. Duval's advice echoed in my ears. Witnesses. So I waited. I let the arrogance build. I let her assumptions grow. I let her dig her hole deeper and deeper, until the moment of truth would collapse it around her. And oh, how she dug. At Isabel's birthday, she smirked when I gave her daughter a necklace that had belonged to me. "You're really just giving all the old stuff away, huh, Grandma?" she said loudly. "Guess you don't have much use for it anymore." At Paul's twins' recital, when I tried to take a photo, she leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, Grandma, I'll post better pictures online." You're not exactly keeping up with technology. Each jab should have hurt, but instead, I found myself smiling faintly, even chuckling. Because her words no longer carried power. I had already disarmed her. The irony was delicious. She believed she was wounding me. But in truth, every careless insult only made her downfall more certain. I began to plan quietly. Christmas was approaching. and the family would gather at my home as they always did. It was the perfect stage, everyone present, laughter and lights filling the rooms, Alina at her most boastful. And then, when she crossed the line again as I knew she would, I would reveal the truth. I imagined the hush that would fall over the room when Mr. Duval read aloud the amendment. I imagined the shift in the air when Alina realized she had excluded herself with her own arrogance. I imagined my children finally understanding why I had acted. For years, Alina had treated me as though my voice didn't matter. But soon, it would be the only voice that did. I waited for the perfect moment to let her know. That moment came during Christmas. The house sparkled with lights strung along the roof, the tree glowing proudly in the corner, ornaments collected over decades gleaming like jewels. Christmas was my favorite holiday, the one Leon and I had always cherished most. Even after his passing, I kept the traditions alive, baking his favorite gingerbread cookies, setting the table with the red and gold china, lighting the fire in the hearth before guests arrived. By early evening, the family began to trickle in. Isabel brought a casserole, Paul carried a bottle of wine, and the twins darted toward the tree, their laughter filling the house. I hugged each of them, my heart swelling. Despite the cracks and tension, they were still my family, and I loved them fiercely. Then Alina arrived. She swept in fashionably late, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her coat a designer piece that probably cost more than most people's rent. She kissed me lightly on the cheek before breezing past to join the others, phone in hand. "Don't you look cozy, Grandma?" she said, her voice dripping with amusement as her eyes swept over my festive sweater. "So traditional." I smiled faintly. "Tradition keeps us grounded, Alina." She laughed, tossing her hair back. "Or stuck in the past." Dinner was lively, filled with chatter and clinking glasses. I had made roast turkey, mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce from scratch. Compliments flowed around the table, though Alina barely touched her food, too busy scrolling through her phone and showing her cousins pictures of her recent shopping spree. "Look at these shoes," she said proudly, tilting her screen toward the twins. "Limited edition. Most people could never afford them." The twins smiled politely, their eyes flicking toward me as if unsure whether to respond. I sipped my wine, calm and patient. I knew the moment would come. It was during dessert that she crossed the line. I had brought out the plum pudding, a recipe handed down from my grandmother, soaked in brandy and set aflame in the dimmed lights. The children gasped in delight, clapping at the spectacle. Alina smirked, leaning back in her chair. "Cute, Grandma. Very retro. But nobody eats stuff like this anymore. Honestly, it's kind of irrelevant, don't you think?" The word hung in the air like smoke, choking the warmth from the room. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of her insult sink in. Around the table, Isabel's eyes widened. Paul frowned, Richard cleared his throat. No one spoke. Alina laughed, mistaking their discomfort for agreement. "I mean, come on, nobody does things the old way anymore. We have modern recipes, modern lives. Grandma's just, well, she tries." The fire crackled in the hearth, its light flickering across the stunned faces of my family. I set my fork down carefully, folded my hands in my lap, and looked at Alina. Her eyes sparkled with arrogance, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. She didn't know that every word she spoke was digging her deeper. She didn't know that her inheritance, the future she so casually bragged about, had already been stripped from her. She didn't know that tonight, of all nights, she was about to learn the truth. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. The table fell silent. Even the twins stopped fidgeting. "Alina?" I said softly, my voice calm but steady. "Do you know what's truly irrelevant?" She smirked. "What's that, Grandma?" "Entitlement," I replied. Confusion flickered across her face, but I didn't explain. Not yet. I wasn't going to waste my breath arguing with her. I had something far more powerful planned. I turned to the hallway, where the sound of footsteps echoed faintly. My heart thudded with anticipation. Mr. Duval had arrived. And then, she said something that made my decision final. In front of everyone. She laughed at me again. The timing was almost cruel in its perfection. We had finished dessert, the children were running circles around the tree, and the adults lingered at the table with their glasses of wine. It was the moment I usually stood to give a small toast, something Leon and I had always done together, a tradition of gratitude. I rose from my seat, lifting my glass. Before we move to gifts, I'd like to say something. All eyes turned toward me, though Alina sighed audibly and muttered, "Here we go," under her breath. I ignored her. This house has seen decades of Christmas dinners. It has held laughter, tears, triumphs, and challenges. Leon and I built this life for all of you, not for ourselves, but so our children and grandchildren could flourish. There were nods around the table. Paul's eyes softened. Isabel smiled faintly. But Alina rolled her eyes and smirked. "Grandma," she interrupted, her tone dripping with condescension. "We love your stories, but let's be honest. You're not exactly the future. Times have changed. You're, well, kind of irrelevant now." The room went still. Isabel gasped softly. Paul muttered, "Alina," in warning. Alina leaned back, swirling the wine in her glass as though she had said something witty. "No offense," she added carelessly, though the smirk on her lips betrayed her satisfaction. I set my glass down deliberately. My voice, when I spoke, was calm but firm. "You think I'm irrelevant, Alina. But tonight, you're going to learn just how wrong you are." Her smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before I could answer, footsteps echoed from the hall. Mr. Duval entered, briefcase in hand, his expression composed and professional. The room shifted instantly, the children hushed. Isabel and Paul exchanged bewildered glances, and Alina's eyes widened. "Who is this?" she demanded, though her voice wavered. "My lawyer," I replied. The weight of those two words hung in the air. Mr. Duval nodded politely to the family before setting his briefcase on the table. "Good evening. Forgive the intrusion, but Sylvette asked me to be here tonight. She has a matter she wishes to make clear to everyone." Alina laughed nervously, tossing her hair back. "Grandma, are you serious? On Christmas?" "Very serious," I said. I gestured for Mr. Duval to proceed. He opened his briefcase with a soft click, withdrawing a thick folder. The sound of paper sliding free filled the silence. He laid the documents flat on the table, his fingers deliberate as he arranged them. Alina crossed her arms, rolling her eyes. "This is ridiculous. What are you trying to prove?" Mr. Duval adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but cutting. "We're here to clarify the future of this estate and its beneficiaries. There have been misconceptions. Tonight, those will be resolved." A murmur rippled through the table. Isabel leaned forward, whispering, "Mom, what's going on?" But I didn't answer. My eyes never left Alina. She forced a laugh, her bravado slipping. "Grandma, you don't need to do this. We all know how things will go. Everyone gets their share, right?" I smiled faintly. "No, Alina. Not everyone." Her face went pale. "Mr. Duval cleared his throat and began reading. "This amendment to the last will and testament of Sylvette Grant was executed 3 weeks ago. Effective immediately, the individual named Alina Grace is hereby excluded as a beneficiary of the estate. Her share is to be divided among the remaining heirs." Gasps filled the room. Isabel covered her mouth with her hand. Paul muttered a stunned, "What?" And Richard set his glass down with a sharp clink. Alina shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What? No, you can't do that." I met her wide, panicked eyes with calm steadiness. "I can." And I did. Her voice rose, shrill and desperate. "This is insane. I'm your granddaughter. You can't just erase me from the family like that." "You erased yourself," I said softly. "Every time you mocked me. Every time you dismissed my advice. Every time you called me irrelevant. You made your choice long before I made mine." The silence that followed was heavier than any noise could have been. Alina's mouth opened and closed, her face flushed red. This isn't fair! You can't do this just because I hurt your feelings, Mr. Duval's voice interrupted smoothly. This isn't about feelings, Miss Grace. It's about respect, responsibility, and the wishes of the estate's owner. And I assure you the documents are legally binding. There is no ambiguity. Her bravado crumbled. She looked around the table, searching for support, but found only stunned silence. Isabel's expression was a mixture of shock and disappointment, Paul's face stern, Richard's eyes downcast. For once, no one laughed with her, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. That was the moment I called for Mr. Duval. The room fell silent when he entered. Even though Mr. Duval had already spoken, his presence still seemed to radiate authority. The quiet was suffocating. Only the faint crackle of the fire filled the space. Every pair of eyes at the table darted between me, him, and Alina, who stood trembling with disbelief. She slammed her palms against the table. This is ridiculous. You can't actually mean this, Grandma. You're not serious. I've never been more serious, I said evenly. Her voice cracked as she laughed, though it was forced, brittle. You're punishing me? For what? For being honest? For living my life differently than you? That's not a reason to cut someone out of their inheritance. Mr. Duval remained unflinching. Miss Grace, your grandmother is under no obligation to leave you anything. In fact, she is under no obligation to leave anyone anything. The law grants her full control over her estate, and her decision has been documented, signed, and witnessed. It is final. But I'm family, she shouted, her voice shrill. You can't just erase family with a pen. I met her eyes steadily. Family is more than blood, Alina. Family is respect, kindness, love. If you can't give those things, then blood alone doesn't entitle you to anything. For once, her bravado cracked entirely. Her face flushed, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. She looked around the table, seeking allies. But the others sat in uneasy silence. Isabel's hands were folded tightly in her lap. Paul's expression was hard. Richard kept his gaze down. No one spoke in her defense. You can't do this, she whispered. Her voice smaller now, fragile. You wouldn't. Mr. Duval slid the folder across the table toward me. She already did, and I will ensure it is carried out. Alina snatched the papers, flipping through them desperately. Her hands shook as her eyes scanned the pages, the legal language twisting her face with confusion and fear. This doesn't mean anything. I'll contest it. I'll go to court. Mr. Duval's voice was cool, measured. You may contest, Miss Grace, but you will lose. The documents are airtight, and the witnesses to her capacity and intent will testify. All you would succeed in doing is draining your own finances on legal fees. Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she was speechless. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. You always spoke as if my life, my work, my sacrifices were already yours to inherit, but they aren't. They were never yours by right. They were mine to give or withhold. And I've chosen. Tears welled in her eyes, though anger burned behind them. You're doing this because I said you were irrelevant. You're twisting one word into an excuse to ruin me. No, I said quietly. I'm doing this because that one word was the truth of how you see me. And if you see me as irrelevant while I'm alive, then you don't deserve to benefit from what I leave behind when I'm gone. The weight of my words sank into the room. Even the children in the next room seemed to sense the gravity, their laughter falling silent. Alina's shoulders slumped as she sank back into her chair. This isn't fair, she muttered weakly. Mr. Duval clasped his hands together. Fairness is not a legal standard, Miss Grace. Respect and intent are what matter here, and your grandmother's intent is clear. For the first time in years, the power dynamic had shifted. Alina, once so loud and domineering, sat small and shaken. And I, the woman she had mocked as irrelevant, stood taller than ever. I straightened my blazer, my heart steady, my voice strong. You thought I was powerless, but tonight proves otherwise. The room remained hushed, the truth settling like heavy snow on Christmas night. But her smirk faded when he opened the documents. Mr. Duval read the clause slowly. The room was so quiet you could hear the logs settling in the fireplace. Mr. Duval adjusted his glasses, flipped to the marked page in the folder, and spoke with deliberate calm. This amendment, signed and notarized on November 15th of this year, states the following. In recognition of ongoing disrespect and disregard, I, Sylvette Grant, do hereby revoke and remove Alina Grace as a beneficiary of my estate. Her shares shall be divided equally among the remaining heirs. The words hung heavy in the air, gasps rippled around the table. Isabel pressed a hand to her chest, her lips parting in shock. Paul leaned forward, his brows furrowed. Even Richard looked shaken, though he said nothing. Alina's face drained of color. She snatched at the papers again, scanning the lines as though her eyes could change the ink. No, this isn't real. You can't actually write this down. I not only wrote it down, I said softly. I signed it. And Mr. Duval made it binding. Alina slammed the folder shut, her breath coming fast. This is insane. You're doing this because I hurt your feelings? Because I told the truth? Grandma, you can't just erase me like this. I'm your granddaughter. Mr. Duval cleared his throat. Miss Grace, this is not about a single word. It is about a pattern of behavior, witnessed and documented over years. Your grandmother has every legal right to determine her beneficiaries as she sees fit. And she has chosen, quite clearly. Her voice rose to a near scream. This isn't fair. Paul finally spoke, his voice firm. Alina, sit down. Yelling won't change anything. She turned on him, eyes blazing. Of course you'd take her side. This benefits you. You've always been jealous of me. Paul's face hardened, but he didn't respond. Isabel, however, did. Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. Jealous? Alina, you've been handed more than anyone else in this family. Mom paid for your tuition, your rent, your endless expenses, and you treated her like she was nothing. You don't get to play the victim now. Alina's mouth opened, then closed. Tears spilled down her cheeks, smudging her makeup. I didn't mean it like that, she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. I leaned forward, my gaze steady. You meant it every time. Every eye roll, every dismissive word, every moment you mocked me. You showed me who you are, Alina. And now, I've shown you who I am. Her lip trembled. You'll regret this, she hissed. No, I replied calmly. The only thing I regret is how long I let you treat me that way. Mr. Duval tapped the document lightly. This amendment is permanent unless Sylvette chooses otherwise. And given the clarity of her intent, I would advise you to accept it. Any attempt to contest will fail. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the faint pop of the fire. Alina slumped in her chair, her bravado shattered. The woman who once strutted through life as though it owed her everything now sat small and defeated, the weight of consequences finally pressing down. For years she had laughed at me. For years she had treated me as though I were invisible, irrelevant. But tonight, in the presence of everyone she once boasted to, she learned the truth. I wasn't irrelevant. I was decisive. I wasn't powerless. I was the one, holding all the power. And for once, she had no words left. But Mr. Duval's next words silenced even her. He explained why she was excluded. Mr. Duval adjusted his glasses again, his tone steady and professional, as though he were addressing a courtroom rather than a Christmas dinner table. The reasoning behind this amendment is clear. Mrs. Grant, he gestured toward me, has the right to determine her heirs based not only on blood but on conduct. She has stated, and I have documented, that Miss Grace's pattern of disrespect, entitlement, and disregard for family values influenced this decision. Alina's head snapped up. Pattern of disrespect? That's ridiculous. I was just joking. Everyone knows that. Grandma's too sensitive. Mr. Duval didn't blink. When jokes become habitual, when they erode respect, they reveal character. Courts do not weigh sarcasm, they weigh evidence. And the evidence here is overwhelming. Her hands balled into fists. Evidence? What evidence? He turned calmly to me. Would you like me to explain, Sylvette? I nodded. Mr. Duval folded his hands. Over the past decade, Alina has demonstrated repeated disregard for the contributions and sacrifices made by her grandmother. From dismissing traditions and heirlooms, to mocking advice, to assuming entitlement over property not yet hers, all of this is not hearsay. It has been witnessed by family members repeatedly. Tonight, in fact, provided yet another example. He glanced around the table, and no one disagreed. Isabel shifted uncomfortably. Paul leaned back with his arms crossed, and Richard exhaled slowly. Alina's eyes darted around desperately. You're all just letting her do this? She's manipulating you. I spoke then, my voice calm but unwavering. I don't need to manipulate anyone, Alina. Your words speak for themselves. Every time you called me old-fashioned, every time you rolled your eyes, every time you told me I was irrelevant, you built this case for me. Her tears spilled over, streaking her carefully applied makeup. I didn't mean it, she whispered. Yes, you did, I said softly. And even if you didn't, the fact remains you never once stopped to think about how your words cut. You never showed remorse until you realized what it would cost you. Mr. Duval's voice filled the silence again. The law does not require love, Miss Grace. And your grandmother's intent is crystal clear. You are excluded. The distribution of assets will go to those who have demonstrated respect and care. Your name has been removed entirely. The reality hit her like a tidal wave. Her shoulders sagged, and she buried her face in her hands. For the first time, she wasn't smirking, wasn't boasting, wasn't flaunting her imagined future. She was simply a young woman facing the consequences of her arrogance. The others watched silently. Isabel's expression softened with sympathy, but she didn't intervene. Paul looked tired, as though this outcome had been inevitable all along. Richard cleared his throat but remained silent, perhaps understanding the wisdom in not interfering. Alina looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Don't do this. I can change. I'll be better. I'll show you respect. Just don't cut me out. For a moment, the grandmother in me, the woman who once cradled her as a baby, who kissed her scraped knees, who paid her tuition, wanted to waver. But then I remembered the laughter, the dismissals, the word irrelevant tossed carelessly across my table. I straightened my shoulders. Respect isn't something you turn on when it benefits you. It's something you live by. And you've shown me who you are. Her face crumpled. You're choosing to ruin me. No, I said firmly. I'm choosing to protect myself and the legacy I built. You excluded yourself, Alina. I only signed the paper. The room was silent, the truth undeniable. Mr. Duval closed the folder with a decisive snap. The amendment is valid, witnessed, and binding. Contesting it will only confirm what is already plain to see that entitlement has no place in this family's inheritance. For years, Alina had believed she was untouchable. Tonight, in front of everyone, she discovered she was wrong. But the more she screamed, the clearer her true character became. When the shouting stopped, I stood taller. The storm of Alina's protests had finally run out of thunder. She sat slumped in her chair, her face blotchy with tears, her shoulders shaking as she buried her gaze in the floor. The arrogance that had once filled the room with her voice was gone, replaced by silence and the heavy weight of consequence. I rose slowly, smoothing my blazer, letting the hush of the moment stretch. For years I had been the one to shrink back, the one whose words were dismissed, the one who let things slide for the sake of peace. But not anymore. This house, I began, my voice steady, was built on respect. Respect for each other. Respect for our history. Respect for the sacrifices that made this life possible. Without respect, there is no family, only strangers tied by blood. Paul nodded faintly, his arms still crossed. Isabel leaned forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Even the children, sensing something important was happening, had gone still in the other room. I turned my gaze to Alina, though my words were for everyone. I've been told I'm old-fashioned. I've been mocked for traditions, dismissed for my advice, called irrelevant in my own home. But let me be clear, respect is never irrelevant. Love is never irrelevant. Dignity is never irrelevant. And anyone who treats it as such will find themselves excluded not just from my will, but from the heart of this family. The firelight flickered across the room, illuminating faces caught between shock and understanding. Tonight is not just about Alina, I continued. It is about the values this family will carry forward. I won't be here forever, but while I am, I will not sit quietly while disrespect festers. If you want to be part of this family's legacy, you must honor the people who came before you, the work that was done for you, and the sacrifices that made your life possible. Alina sniffled, her hands trembling. I didn't know you felt that way, she whispered. You never asked, I said softly. You never listened, you assumed, and in doing so, you lost your place. I looked around the table once more, letting my eyes meet each of theirs. From this day forward, the rules are simple. Respect is not optional. Gratitude is not optional. Love is not optional. Without them, there is no inheritance, only absence. A heavy silence followed, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was reverent, as though the very walls of the house absorbed my words and held them like truth etched in stone. Paul finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Mom's right. We've all let things slide, laughed off things we shouldn't have. That ends now. Isabel reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. You've carried this family on your back for decades, Mom. It's time we carried your voice with the weight it deserves. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I held them back. For too long, I had been the one bending, yielding, staying quiet. Tonight, I was unbending. Tonight, my voice filled the room. Alina shifted uncomfortably, whispering, So, I'm just cut out completely? I straightened my shoulders. Yes. You are excluded. And the only person who can change that is you, but not with promises, not with begging, with consistent, genuine respect. Until then, you have no claim here. Her head dropped, and she said nothing more. The fire crackled, and for the first time in years, I felt the house itself breathe easier. The walls seemed lighter, the air clearer, as though it knew balance had been restored. I took a deep breath and raised my glass once more. To respect, to dignity, to love, may they never again be treated as irrelevant. The others lifted their glasses slowly, their eyes meeting mine with solemn agreement. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. And that was when the silence became respect. That night, I sat by the fire with peace in my heart. The family had gone home. The dishes were stacked in the sink, the wrapping paper gathered into neat piles, the faint scent of cinnamon still lingering in the air. The house was quiet again, the way it always was when the laughter and noise faded. But tonight, the quiet felt different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I sank into Leon's old armchair by the fire, the embers glowing low, my glass of wine resting in my hand. My heart felt lighter than it had in years. For so long, I had believed that staying silent was the price of keeping peace. I had endured the jokes, the dismissals, the way my words were brushed aside. I had told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that it was better to let things go. But silence had cost me more than I realized. It had made me invisible in my own home. Tonight changed that. I thought of Alina's face when the papers were read. The disbelief, the panic, the cracks in her carefully polished mask. I thought of the way the room had fallen silent, not in mockery or dismissal, but in recognition. Recognition that my voice mattered, that my decisions carried weight, that I was not irrelevant. I thought of Leon. I imagined him sitting across from me, his familiar smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He would have been proud, not because I had punished Alina, but because I had finally stood tall, protecting the values we had built our lives upon. Respect, Sylvie. he used to say. Without respect, love doesn't last. Without respect, nothing does. How right he had been. I took a sip of wine, the warmth spreading through me, and let my mind wander back through the years. The sacrifices, the long nights of work, the choices made not for myself but for the family. None of it had been irrelevant. Every decision, every struggle, every triumph had paved the way for them to live comfortably. Alina may not have seen it, but Isabel did. Paul did. The twins would one day understand. My legacy was more than money or property. It was the lesson that dignity cannot be dismissed, that respect cannot be mocked without consequence. The fire popped, a spark flaring briefly before fading. I smiled at it, feeling as though the house itself was nodding in agreement. I knew Alina would not forget this night. She might rage. She might cry. She might even try to repair the damage someday. Or she might not. That was her choice. But I had made mine. And it was final. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, the warmth of the fire wrapping around me like a blanket. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the sting of being dismissed. I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful, seen, relevant. The world hadn't written me off, not as long as I held the courage to speak. And with that thought, I whispered into the quiet, a final toast to myself, to Leon, to the values that would outlive us both. My granddaughter called me irrelevant, but my lawyer called her excluded.